The sun had just begun to set over the small, bustling town. Streets were alive with people hurrying home, but amidst the chaos, one young boy stood frozen on the sidewalk, his eyes glued to a sleek black car parked by the curb. He wasn't looking at the car for the reasons most people would. It wasn't the shiny chrome or the luxurious leather interior that caught his attention, it was the flat tire. Jamarcus had seen cars like this before. Fancy cars, driven by people who had money, who seemed like they lived in a world far away from his own. A world where worries about rent, food, or school supplies didn't exist. Where dreams weren't confined by poverty, and opportunities didn't slip away before you even had a chance to grab them. But now, standing at a distance, he had an impulse he couldn't ignore. Jamarcus wasn't the kind of kid to walk away from a challenge. And right now, this shiny black car with its flat tire was his challenge. His fingers gripped the straps of his old backpack, the ones that were frayed and barely holding together. He knew this wasn't his problem, but something deep inside told him that maybe, just maybe, this moment could change everything. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the street, his sneakers scraping the pavement with every step. "Hey, you need help with that?" Jamarcus called out, his voice sounding more confident than he felt. The man, who had been leaning against the car, visibly surprised, turned to look at the young boy. He was dressed in a suit, expensive shoes, and a look on his face that suggested he was used to handling things on his own. His eyebrows furrowed slightly as if wondering if the boy was joking. Jamarcus, however, didn't back down. "I can fix it," he said simply. For a moment, the millionaire said nothing, studying the boy's earnest face. His hesitation was palpable, as if he was weighing the situation. After all, what did a kid like Jamarcus know about changing tires? But there was something about the boy, the way he spoke, the quiet determination in his eyes, that made the man lower his guard, just for a second. "All right," he said, shrugging. "Go ahead." Jamarcus knelt down, grabbing the old, rusty jack from the trunk, his hands shaking just a bit. He wasn't used to working with tools. His life didn't involve much fixing. But he knew what it felt like to help, to lend a hand when no one else did. This wasn't just about the tire, it was about something more, something he couldn't explain. As he worked, the man watched, almost intrigued by the boy's determination. What neither of them knew at that moment was that this small act, this simple, selfless act of kindness, would set a chain of events in motion that would change Jamarcus's life forever. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something he'd never imagined. Part 1: The Boy's Struggles and Dreams. Jamarcus's life wasn't like the ones you saw in the movies. His world wasn't filled with shiny cars, flashy gadgets, or vacations to far-off places. His world was simple, raw, and filled with challenges most people could never imagine. He grew up in a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the smell of cooking food often mingled with the sound of sirens. Every day was a struggle. His mother worked long hours at a diner, serving coffee and pancakes to people who barely looked up from their phones. She was tired, always tired, but she never complained. She had to make sure Jamarcus had what he needed, even if it meant putting her own needs last. His father? He hadn't been around much. Some days, Jamarcus would hear his mother whispering under her breath, her voice trembling. Other days, it was just the emptiness of the apartment that spoke the loudest. But Jamarcus never let it bother him. He knew his mother loved him. That was all that mattered. Still, it wasn't easy. At school, Jamarcus felt invisible. He didn't have the latest sneakers or the newest phone, and he certainly didn't have the connections the other kids had. The kids at school would talk about their weekend trips, their new gadgets, and the latest trends, but Jamarcus had never seen most of those places, nor could he afford to buy those things. His friends were few, and even they didn't really understand. They had their own struggles, but they didn't feel the weight of it the way Jamarcus did. He was different. And being different meant feeling alone sometimes. But there was a fire inside him, one that never went out. Jamarcus knew there was more to life than this. He dreamed of something bigger, something better. He wanted to be someone important. Not for fame or fortune, but because he believed he had a purpose. He wasn't sure how he'd get there, but he knew it had to be different from the life he was living. At night, after his mother came home and they'd eaten their meager dinner, Jamarcus would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining a different life. A life where he wasn't just getting by, but where he could help others too. He imagined a future where he didn't have to worry about money, about his mother working endless hours just to keep food on the table. He wanted to help people, real people. People like his mother, who worked tirelessly but was never appreciated. People like him, who struggled to make ends meet but still believed in kindness and doing the right thing. He wanted to create something that could change the world. Maybe that was too big of a dream for a kid who was just trying to survive, but Jamarcus held onto it with everything he had. There was a mentor he had always admired from a distance. Mr. Henderson was a local business owner who owned a small car repair shop in the heart of the town. He wasn't a millionaire by any means, but he was respected. He was the kind of person who helped everyone, no matter what. Mr. Henderson always had time for a conversation, a bit of advice, or a hand when you needed it. Jamarcus often watched him from a distance, hoping that one day, he could learn from him. He saw how Mr. Henderson helped people in the neighborhood, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Jamarcus admired that. He knew that was the kind of person he wanted to be. But dreams were one thing, and reality was another. Jamarcus's life had been filled with no's. No, he couldn't afford that. No, there was no time for him to take on extra work. No, he couldn't join the school club or even get the materials he needed for his project. No one ever told him yes, not unless it was something small or insignificant. But he never gave up. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew that if he kept pushing, kept working hard, maybe, just maybe, he could make a way for himself. Maybe one day, he would get his yes. Every morning, Jamarcus would help his mother get ready for her long shift. He'd make her breakfast, pack her lunch, and see her off with a tight hug. Sometimes, he'd walk with her to the bus stop, making sure she was safe. Then, he'd head to school, knowing that his day would be filled with struggles, with moments of feeling like he wasn't enough. But in the quiet of his heart, he had a dream that kept him going. A dream of change. A dream of something greater than this life. Something that would take him far away from the noisy apartment, the empty refrigerator, and the loneliness that sometimes weighed so heavy on his chest. And as he walked to school that morning, he couldn't have known that a simple flat tire, an unexpected twist of fate, was about to change everything. This was his moment. Part 2, The Meeting with the Millionaire. It was one of those ordinary afternoons when everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. Jamarcus had just finished his school day and was heading home, backpack slung over his shoulder. The sun was still high in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement, and the air had a stillness to it that seemed out of place. Jamarcus wasn't paying much attention to his surroundings. His thoughts were elsewhere, occupied with the worries of the day, the unfinished homework, the pressure to help his mother more at home, and the never-ending cycle of trying to make something of himself. As he walked down the sidewalk, he noticed a car up ahead, parked on the side of the road. It wasn't just any car, it was a sleek black sports car, the kind you see in magazines but never in real life. Jamarcus stopped in his tracks, his eyes drawn to the vehicle. It was perfect, shining in the afternoon sun. The sort of car that belonged to someone with money, someone who didn't have to worry about the things he did. But then, as his gaze moved down the side of the car, he saw it. The tire was flat. His heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose surge through him. He had never worked on a car before, but he knew how to fix things. He'd fixed bicycles, toys, and even a leaky faucet once. Fixing a car? That was a whole different level, but something in him told him that now was the time to step up. Without thinking, Jamarcus walked towards the car. He was halfway there when the man leaning against the hood of the car noticed him. "Hey, you okay?" Jamarcus called out, keeping his voice steady. The man, who had been glancing at his phone, looked up. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his hair styled in a way that made it clear he was someone used to getting attention. He raised an eyebrow, a little surprised by the boy's sudden appearance. Yeah. Just got a flat," he said, his voice filled with the weariness of someone who had dealt with this kind of problem more times than they could count. Jamarcus stood there for a moment, thinking. He had to act quickly, before the man thought he was just some kid asking questions. "Do you need help?" Jamarcus asked, surprising himself with how confident he sounded. The man looked him up and down, sizing him up. His eyes lingered on Jamarcus's worn shoes, the frayed backpack, and the way the boy stood a little too still, as if trying not to seem out of place. "Help? I think I've got it covered," the man replied, his tone polite but distant. Jamarcus didn't back down. "I can fix it. I've helped with stuff like this before." The millionaire stared at him for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. He was skeptical, of course. What did a kid like this know about changing a tire? But something about the boy's calm demeanor made him hesitate. "All right," the man said, shrugging slightly. "Go ahead." Jamarcus's heart raced as he knelt down, feeling the weight of the moment. He had no idea what he was doing, at least, not exactly. But he wasn't going to back out now. The tools in the trunk felt foreign to him. The jack, the lug wrench, everything seemed larger than it really was. But he kept going, remembering the basics he'd seen his uncle do once when fixing his old car. The millionaire watched quietly, arms crossed, his gaze shifting from the boy to the flat tire and back again. There was an almost amused look in his eyes, like he wasn't sure if he should be impressed or embarrassed. He had called a tow truck, after all. But something in the way Jamarcus moved, the quiet determination, made him pause. He was watching more closely now, intrigued. Jamarcus fumbled with the wrench for a moment, almost dropping it. He bit his lip in concentration, trying to ignore the sweat trickling down his face. The millionaire said nothing, but his eyes never left the boy. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the tire came loose. Jamarcus let out a quiet breath of relief. He hadn't realized how tense he was until the tire was off and he could finally breathe. He quickly replaced it with the spare and tightened the lug nuts. The car was ready to go, and Jamarcus stood up, brushing his hands on his pants. "Done," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. The millionaire stood there for a moment, speechless. He looked at the tire, then at Jamarcus, then back at the tire. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected anything, really. Just a quick fix. But this wasn't just about changing a flat tire. It was about something else. The boy, with his worn clothes and scrappy determination, had done something he didn't have to do. And in that moment, something shifted. The millionaire's attitude toward the boy had changed, even if just a little. "Thanks," the millionaire finally said, his voice a little softer now. Jamarcus gave a quick nod, his face lighting up with a smile. "No problem." As the millionaire got into his car, he hesitated for a moment. Jamarcus was about to turn and leave when the man called out. "Hey, kid," he said, rolling down the window. "You did a good job. Let me give you something for your help." Jamarcus looked at him, confused for a moment. That's all right, sir. I didn't do it for money." The millionaire paused, a small smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "I know you didn't. But you still earned it." Jamarcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't used to this, people offering him something without expecting anything in return. But before he could protest, the man handed him a business card. "Call me sometime," the man said. "Maybe I can help you out. You've got potential." Jamarcus took the card, still unsure what to say. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, a card. But it felt like the start of something important. Something that could change everything. As the car drove off, Jamarcus stood there, staring at the business card in his hand. It wasn't just a card. It was an opportunity. For the first time in a long while, Jamarcus felt like maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change. Part 3. The Transformation. The next few days felt like a blur to Jamarcus. He had barely slept the night after the encounter with the millionaire, his mind racing with thoughts of the business card he'd been handed. The words still echoed in his head, "You've got potential." What did that mean? Was it just a polite gesture? Or did this man actually see something in him? Jamarcus found himself walking past his mother's old, worn-out kitchen table, glancing at the card over and over again. The weight of it seemed heavier than he imagined. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a doorway to something bigger, something that could pull him out of the life he'd known. The life where everything was a struggle, where hope was sometimes a hard thing to find. He stared at the card one more time, tracing the edges with his finger, then made a decision. He was going to call. He didn't know what he was hoping for, maybe advice, maybe an opportunity, maybe a chance to change his life. But Jamarcus knew he couldn't just let the moment slip away. The call was brief. The millionaire, whose name, he learned, was Mr. Alexander, answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Mr. Alexander's voice was smooth, warm even, like he had all the time in the world. "Hi, this is Jamarcus, the kid who helped you with your flat tire," Jamarcus said, his voice cracking slightly. He wasn't used to calling strangers. "Oh, yes. Jamarcus. How's everything going?" Did you get that tire on all right?" Mr. Alexander's tone was friendly, but there was a curiosity behind it that made Jamarcus sit a little straighter. "Yeah, everything's good," Jamarcus replied, his heart pounding. I just wanted to thank you again for the business card." "Of course," Mr. Alexander said. "But don't thank me just yet. I was serious when I said you've got potential. Tell me, what do you want to do? What's your dream?" The question caught Jamarcus off guard. It wasn't a simple question. It wasn't about his next move or where he saw himself in a year. It was about the big picture. His future. His purpose. Jamarcus took a deep breath. "I want to help people, sir. I want to do something that makes a difference. I don't have much, but I want to make sure my mom doesn't have to work so hard. I want a better life, for both of us." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a pause that stretched for what felt like forever. And then, Mr. Alexander spoke, his voice calm but firm. "All right, Jamarcus. I like that answer. You've got the right mindset. Why don't you come down to my office tomorrow? Let's talk about how we can start making that dream a reality." The words hit Jamarcus like a shock. Come down to his office? Was this really happening? Was he being offered a chance to change everything? The next morning, Jamarcus woke up with more energy than he'd ever felt before. His hands shook with nervous excitement as he got dressed in the best clothes he owned. He didn't have much, but he made sure he looked presentable. His mother, who had already gone to work, hadn't noticed his early departure, but he promised himself he would tell her everything later. When Jamarcus arrived at Mr. Alexander's office, he could barely believe the world around him. The building was tall, gleaming with glass windows that reflected the sun like a mirror. He'd never been in a place like this, never even imagined he'd step foot in a place like this. And now, here he was, waiting in the lobby of a skyscraper, feeling a mixture of awe and disbelief. Mr. Alexander met him in the lobby and smiled when he saw the boy standing there, nervously clutching his backpack. "I'm glad you made it," he said, extending a hand. "Come on up. Let's talk." The conversation was long, longer than Jamarcus had expected, but every word, every piece of advice Mr. Alexander shared felt like it was slowly shaping a new future for him. Mr. Alexander didn't just talk about business. He talked about vision, about hard work, and about believing in yourself when no one else does. He shared stories of his own struggles, how he had come from nothing and built his life from the ground up. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Alexander stood up, walked to his desk, and handed Jamarcus a small envelope. "I want you to take this," he said, his tone serious. "It's a scholarship for a local trade school. You've got the drive, Jamarcus, and I think you've got the potential to go far. Use this to learn something real, something that will give you the tools you need to change your life." Jamarcus's hands trembled as he held the envelope. Inside was more than just money, it was an opportunity. "I don't know what to say," Jamarcus stammered, overwhelmed with emotion. "You don't need to say anything," Mr. Alexander replied with a smile. "Just make sure you take it. And remember, I'm here if you need anything." Jamarcus left that office not just with a scholarship, but with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, someone had believed in him, and he was ready to prove that belief wasn't misplaced. Back at home, he shared the news with his mother, who cried tears of joy when she heard about the scholarship. She held him close, whispering how proud she was of him. But the transformation didn't stop there. The scholarship wasn't just a ticket to a better life, it was the start of something greater. Over the next few months, Jamarcus worked hard in the trade school, learning the skills that would set him on a path toward success. He took every opportunity to build on what Mr. Alexander had given him, whether it was asking questions, learning new things, or finding ways to help others along the way. And every time he felt uncertain, he thought back to that day on the side of the road when he had fixed a flat tire for a stranger. That small act of kindness had turned into a life-changing opportunity. Jamarcus's journey was just beginning, but now, for the first time, he had a clear vision of where he was going. And with that vision came hope, a hope he had never thought possible. Part 4, Final Climax, The Big Change. Months had passed since that life-changing day when Jamarcus had helped the millionaire with his flat tire. Now, as the seasons shifted, so had his life. The boy who once walked the streets filled with doubt and struggle now carried himself with confidence and purpose. He wasn't the same Jamarcus who had only dreamed of something bigger. He was someone who was working tirelessly toward it. Each day after class, he went straight to his part-time job at a local auto repair shop, learning hands-on skills that complemented the training he received at the trade school. He was no longer just a boy with potential, he was becoming a skilled technician, someone who could take apart and rebuild the very machines he once barely understood. And all of it had started with one simple act of kindness, a flat tire. Jamarcus still couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. It felt surreal. The scholarship, the mentorship, the doors that were now opening for him. He had never dreamed that helping a stranger would change the course of his life, but it had. Then, one evening, after finishing a long day at the shop, Jamarcus received an unexpected phone call. His hands were still covered in grease from work, but he answered anyway. "Hello," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Jamarcus, it's Mr. Alexander," the voice on the other end said. "How are you, son?" "Mr. Alexander." "I'm good, sir. Everything's great," Jamarcus replied, trying to keep the excitement in his voice from showing too much. He hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but he had been keeping Mr. Alexander updated on his progress, sharing the small wins and challenges he faced along the way. "Good to hear," Mr. Alexander said, his tone warm but businesslike. "I've been following your progress. You've really been putting in the work, haven't you?" Jamarcus smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. "Yes, sir. I've been learning a lot. It's been tough, but I know it's worth it. I can tell. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Jamarcus. And I think it's time to take the next step." Jamarcus's heart skipped a beat. "Next step? What do you mean?" "I've been keeping an eye on you," Mr. Alexander continued, "and I think you're ready. Ready to work with me. I'm opening a new branch of my company, and I want you to be a part of it. I want you to join my team." Jamarcus stood there, unable to believe what he was hearing. "A job with Mr. Alexander? Are you serious?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Absolutely," Mr. Alexander replied. "You've got the skills, the drive, and the integrity I'm looking for. You've earned it." Jamarcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just a job offer. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, a chance to not only escape the cycle of struggle but to build a future that could change everything. He paused for a moment, then finally found his voice. "I won't let you down, sir. I won't. I know you won't. I'm proud of you, Jamarcus. You've earned this." After they hung up, Jamarcus stood still in the middle of the repair shop, the buzzing of the lights above and the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. He couldn't believe it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, an opportunity, a chance to finally break free from the life he had always known. When he got home, his mother was already there, the smell of dinner wafting from the kitchen. She looked up as Jamarcus walked in, his face alight with excitement. "Mom," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I got it. I got the job." His mother's eyes widened in shock, and then a smile broke across her face. She rushed over to him, pulling him into a tight hug. "I knew it," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I knew you were going to make it." Jamarcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her too. All the years she had sacrificed, all the nights she had worked tirelessly to provide for him, were finally leading to this moment. "I'm going to make it, Mom. I promise you." And he meant it. As the days passed, Jamarcus began working alongside Mr. Alexander, learning even more about the business world, about leadership, and about what it took to succeed. The work wasn't always easy, but it was rewarding in ways he had never imagined. He was no longer just a boy with potential, he was a young man with a real future ahead of him. And every time he looked back at the moment when he fixed that flat tire for a stranger, he realized that it had all come full circle. That one act of kindness, that one moment of stepping up when it seemed like the world was moving too fast, had led him here. Jamarcus's life had changed forever. And this was just the beginning. This final part encapsulates the culmination of Jamarcus's transformation, from a boy with nothing to a young man on the path to success. It brings together his hard work, the support of his mother, and the opportunity provided by Mr. Alexander. The emotional payoff comes when he is offered a job with Mr. Alexander, signaling the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Would you like me to proceed with the conclusion or any adjustments? Jamarcus sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. A few months ago, he was just a boy struggling to make it through each day, weighed down by circumstances that felt impossible to escape. He had nothing but dreams, dreams that, if he were being honest, often felt out of reach. But now he had hope. Now he had a future. Mr. Alexander had seen something in him, something Jamarcus himself had almost forgotten. He had given Jamarcus more than just a job. He had given him belief, the kind of belief that made a boy from a struggling neighborhood see himself as something more. And it all started with a flat tire. Jamarcus couldn't stop thinking about it. How one small act of kindness had opened a door he never even knew existed. How choosing to help a stranger, expecting nothing in return, had led to the biggest opportunity of his life. It made him wonder, how many chances do we miss simply because we don't take that first step? The world was full of stories like his, people who just needed one opportunity, one person to notice them, one moment to prove themselves. Jamarcus promised himself that, one day, he would be that person for someone else. He would remember what it felt like to struggle, what it felt like to be overlooked. And when he made it, when he built the future he dreamed of, he would reach back and help the next kid who needed a chance. Because that's what Mr. Alexander had done for him. And that's how real change happens. And maybe, just maybe, the next person watching this video will be inspired to do the same. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where kindness changed your life? Or have you ever been the person who made a difference for someone else? Share your story in the comments, we'd love to hear it. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an incredible real-life story like this one. Because sometimes, the smallest actions can change lives in ways we never expect. Thank you for watching, and remember, every act of kindness matters.